Good evening, Avrami.
Good evening.
Good evening. Apparently you're in charge.
Apparently so. Thank you, Rabbi Kurzer, for giving up of your time.
Not at all.
Your biography speaks for itself. It's already been passed around. The only addition I would make that wasn't included is, for those who don't know, you are the brother-in-law of our Rav, and therefore, without further ado, I will hand over to you and thank you.
Okay, great. Feel free, everybody, to please do turn on the screens. Feel free to unmute if you'd like. Well, obviously not during. I mean, if you have questions, feel free to unmute. Let me just close this up so it doesn't disturb us. And yeah, so of course Rabbi Berman is away, as Avrami pointed out, and of course everybody knows why Rabbi Berman is away, because Parsha Tazria Metzora is the sort of parsha that unfortunately rabbis like to disappear for. But all joking aside, it's actually it's the sort of parsha where you end up looking for small little things to talk about. Some people sort of end up focusing on bris milah or spend a long time talking about lashon hara. Why? We'll explain in just a moment. But actually, I thought it would be a good opportunity to actually look at the Metzora itself, particularly because the punishment of the Metzora obviously centers around what? On him having to be put away from everybody else, right? Spending time effectively in a lockdown. And after having spent many, many weeks in lockdown, I think there are actually some really, really powerful lessons. I see people still coming in. Avrami, should we wait a couple of minutes or we'll just keep going?
No, I think just as people will join. So
okay, great, fine.
Carry on. Thank you.
No worries. So as I said, Metzora obviously has to leave the camp, and it's in a sense sort of quarantine. So having spent a lot of time in lockdown, I think there are some really, really good lessons. So as I said, feel free to jump in at any time. But of course, why do people spend a lot of time talking about lashon hara? Because famously, lashon hara is the reason why a person gets tzoras. What is the source for that? Where does the Torah say it? Anyone feel free to jump in. If you can find it in the parasha, you're doing better than me. No mention of lashon hara anywhere in the parsha. We don't get told why a person gets tzoras. The Torah just jumps in, beginning with Perek Gimel, says that
Miriam.
who said? Someone said Miriam. Very good. Miriam will come to Miriam in a moment, but again, it doesn't appear in this week's parsha. So that's a little bit later on. Yes, many point to Miriam, but actually the Gemara, which does list reasons, lists more than one reason why. Maybe that's why lashon hara is the most famous one. Maybe because you're right, there is a story in the Torah about it. But the Gemara actually lists 7 different reasons why a person might get tzoras. So before we come to Miriam, let's just go through that Gemara briefly. See all the different reasons, and maybe we can even find a connection between them before we are finished. Actually, before we get to that Gemara, I'll just leave a question for everybody to think about before, which we'll come back to at the end, and that is as follows: the Metzora, as we said, has to spend time in a sort of quarantine, has to spend time away from everybody else. So the question is as follows: is the Metzora allowed to use Zoom? Okay, is the Metzora allowed to use Zoom? Would one who has tzoras, who has to leave the camp, be able to join a shir like this? Maybe. Let's think about it. Okay, let's see if we can come up with an answer by the end of this evening. Okay, so as I said, this week's parasha doesn't give any reason why a person would get tzoras, but the Gemara in Erechin lists 7 different reasons. So Omer Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Al Shiva Devarim Negaim Bo'im. There are 7 reasons why a person could get tzoras. Al Lashon Hara, first one on the list. As I said, probably the most famous one. Al Shvichas Damim, okay, for murder. Again, also pretty bad. Lashon Hara is not a good thing. Murder is not a good thing. I get tzoras is a serious punishment. So, okay, I get it. Very serious thing. Al Shvuas Shov, okay, a wasted oath taken in vain. Gilui Arayas, okay, immorality, again, not good. Al Gasus Ruach, a little bit of arrogance. Doesn't sound so terrible, right? Tzoras seems like a very, very harsh punishment for Gasus Ruach. Va'al Gezel, on theft, Va'al Tzoros Ayin, for stinginess. Unusual list. What is the connection between all of them? And again, some of them seem pretty bad, some of them don't seem so bad. So why exactly do they merit this pretty terrible punishment of tsaras, and tsaras can last for a long time. Actually, we're gonna read about somebody who had tsaras for most of their life. So that's something which I think we need to try and figure out. So let's come back. Someone mentioned Miriam before. Of course, that is really one of the key makoros, of course, where Chazal gets the idea that obviously Lashon Hara is linked to tsaras, although some don't read that story that way. Okay, so obviously we again, just a bit of, for those who haven't read the story recently, just a little bit of a quick chazar of the story. Miriam and Aaron are talking about Moshe's wife. Okay, and all of a sudden, Hashem comes down and tells them, how dare you talk about Moshe this way? Moshe is b'chol beis nemanhu, right? I think that's over here. He says, yes, I speak to him directly, no intermediaries, no dreams, nothing like that. Moshe is the greatest Navi there is, so how can you speak to him that way? Hashem disappears. When the cloud leaves, all of a sudden he named Miriam Metzora Askashalai. She has Tsaras all of a sudden. Okay, so as I said, that is one of the classic examples. Any other stories we have in Tanakh, throughout Tanakh? Now a bit more difficult once you get into Navi and Navim Ksuvim to find, or to sort of remember all of the stories. But there are actually a few different stories to do with Tsaras. Of course, a couple of them are the Haftarahs for Tazria and Metzora. Specifically, the Haftarah for Tazria, I think, so I don't think we'll be reading it this year, is about Naaman and Elisha, which we're not really going to get into. Naaman is somebody who, Elisha was obviously a Navi. Naaman, somebody who had Tsaras, who came to get, to become cured to Elisha. As I said, for time's sake, we're not going to get into that story. Another very interesting story is the story of Uzziah. Uzziah was one of the kings of Yehuda, I believe. I'm pretty sure one of the kings of Yehuda. When the kingdom split in Malachim after Shlomo HaMelech, the kingdom of Israel split into two. You had Malchei Israel, Malchei Yehuda, and Uzziah was one of the kings of Yehuda, and he was a very good king. And actually, so as an interesting side note, the people who get Tsaras in Tanakh tend to be pretty impressive people. Okay, they seem to make a small mistake, and they're punished pretty severely. So whereas there were many bad kings of Israel, unfortunately, there were many kings who drove people towards Avodah Zarah. Uzziah was generally a very, very good king. Vaya'as hayashar, this is in Divrei Yomim. Vaya'as hayashar be'einei Hashem, and he did all the right stuff. But ukeches kosei, when he was at the height of his power, he was a king who, with a conquering army and built cities and did very, very impressive things. And when he was at the height of his power, Gova Liboy, says Divrei Yomim, Gova Liboy, he became a little bit arrogant. Ad lashchis, too arrogant, and he became a little bit corrupt. Vayim al ba'Hashem Elokav. What did he do? Vayavo el heichal Hashem lahaktir al mizbach keteros. He decided he wanted to bring the keteros. And the Kohanim tried to stop him. Of course, the Kohanim are supposed to be the ones who bring the keteros. Long story short, the Kohanim tried to stop him, and he didn't listen. And he got Tsaras. How long did that Tsaras last for? Lasted for the rest of his life. Okay, he became king when he was 16. He reigned for over 50 years, and for most of that time, he was a Metzora, and he had to leave. He was the king of Yehuda at the time. And he had to live outside of Yerushalayim, and his son was the one who actually ran the royal affairs. Again, amazing story. One perhaps we're not familiar with. He's listed in Malachim, but the story really appears later on in Divrei HaYomim. So what do we see from there? What was one of the other reasons why a person gets Tsaras? Gasus Ruach, arrogance, right? So we see that he had a certain amount of arrogance, and that was what led to his Tsaras. Okay, so let's just spend a little bit of time thinking about what Tsaras is, and again, feel free to jump in here. Maybe we'll throw it open to the floor. Actually, at this point, we'll just take a break. If anyone has any questions up till now, feel free to unmute, ask questions, comments, and then we'll move into what Tsaras is and why we get it. So let's throw a question out there. When you think of a Metzora, when the Torah describes that the skin turns white okay, the skin begins to decay in a certain way, right? It seems to, so it's like a rotting skin almost. Actually, to the extreme, they talk about potentially even, decaying to the extent that the limb may fall off, right? What does that remind you of? What is that imagery make us think of when we think of a person turning white and their skin beginning to decay, body beginning to decay? So I think that to me, sorry, yes, who said that?
We'll never know.
Never know. But I didn't hear what they said. I think someone said death. So I'll assume that's what you said.
Yes.
But there you go. Okay, very good. Thank you. So that's right. Right. So really with Metzora, right, for some reason, it seems to be like death, seems to be, in its imagery, it seems to appear like death. And actually, let's go back to the story of Miriam. I stopped a little bit early, but Aaron's reaction when he sees Miriam has tzaras is he says, Vayomer Aaron el Moshe. This is right at the end of Parshas Ba'aloscha. Vayomer Aaron el Moshe, bi Adoni al nasa sheis alem chatos. Don't hold this against us. We're very, very sorry. Al no sehi kames. She should not be like a dead person, right? Again, so we see that Sarah somehow seems to be linked to death. There are actually we can go through a lot of. If you don't believe me, we can go through a lot of proofs. I'll just throw out a couple of different proofs that obviously the process of a Metzora is almost as though the person has died, right? And the question is why, right? Like, what exactly is the message that Hashem is trying to send the Metzora by making them look as though they are a dead person? And actually, it gets a little bit stranger before we begin to understand it, which is as follows. Now, when you have somebody who passes away, right? You have somebody who's nifter. Who in a sense is the person who mourns for them? They don't mourn for themselves, right? You have avelim, you have a relative who mourns, and you have in a sense two separated parties. You have the nifter, you have the person who's passed away, and then you have the avelim, right? And they are separated from each other. So now let's look back at the Metzora. We've said the Metzora is like the nifter, right? The Metzora is like the person who's died, right? They're white and their body is decaying, but the Gemara in Moed Katan actually compares a lot of the halachas of Avelus to halachas of Metzora, right? And Menuda as well, somebody who's put in Chayrim. Okay, so the Gemara seems to connect all of those three people. Not only that, but how long does the Metzora have to stay outside the camp, right? How long does the Metzora have to stay outside the camp? 7 days. Confined away from everybody else for 7 days. When else is a person, other than lockdown, government lockdown, but when else is a person told to stay in their home for 7 days, right? When else are you expected to do that? When you're sitting Shiva, right? So the person sitting Shiva is told you have to stay here for 7 days. Metzora is told you have to stay here for 7 days. So here they sound like they're the Ovel. It doesn't sound like they're the Nifter. It sounds like they're the Ovel. Not only that, of course, in going back to Bisman Beis Hamikdash, when a person comes into contact with a dead body, right, you become Tommy Mace, what do you have to do at the end? You have to sprinkle. You have to sprinkle, of course, from the Parah Adumah. You have to sprinkle ashes at the end of the 7 days. That's how you become Tahar. How does the Metzora become Tahar at the end? You sprinkle. Again, okay, not from the Parah Adumah, but again, so there's sort of this, again, we're sort of beginning to see similarities between the two. If you look, actually, you can look. I was going to say you can look out for it in the Haftarah, but I don't think we're doing the Haftarah this week. But because it's the Haftarah for Tazria, but in the story of Naaman and Elisha, when Naaman comes to be cured, the first reaction, he actually comes to the king before he comes to Elisha the Navi, and the king's reaction is, "Who am I, lahamisu lahachayos?" Right? Who am I to, am I able to cause death and give life? Well, what does that have to do with being a Metzora? The answer is, it has everything to do with being a Metzora, but the question is why, right? What is it about Tzaras that seems to be linked to death? And just the final point, which is that actually the Gemara that lists Lashon Hara as the first of the Averos which leads a person to get Tzaras, also says that Lashon Hara kills 3 people. Very, very strong language. The Gemara says that Lashon Hara kills the speaker, the listener, and the person about whom they are speaking. Right? the person about whom they are speaking. So again, we see this connection between death and the Averus, and also between the Tsoras, which is the punishment at the end of that. Okay, so again, very, very interesting and surprising maybe at first glance. Just one final mocker, and then we'll try and understand it a little bit better. This I was really pleased to find this. Someone pointed it out to me. Rabbi Zalman Sorotskin has a wonderful commentary on the Torah. Rabbi Zalman Sorotskin, of course, was originally from Eastern Europe, moved to Eretz Israel of the last century, died in the sort of I think middle of the 20th century, and he says as follows: Va'al safom ya'ateh. So this is in Perek Gimel Pasuk Mem Hey. So actually, you can see in Rashi. Sorry, Rashi says already this. So if anyone has a chumash with them, you're welcome to look in with me. So as part of what the Metzora has to do, right? Rashi says actually as I said, on Perek Gimel Pasuk Mem Hey Va'al safom ya'ateh ke'ovel, right? Like a mourner, like somebody who's an ovel. And Rabbi Zalman Sorotskin expands on that. He says, Ka'ovel al atzmoi ubesoro. It's like you're mourning for yourself and for your flesh. Shehare Metzora choshev kameis. Okay, so this is exactly what we're saying. That the Metzora seems to be playing both sides of the coin here, right? The Metzora seems to be both the niftar and the ovel at the same time. This very strange paradigm where this person is receiving a punishment which makes them be both the person who's departed from this world and mourning for the person who's departed from this world. And the question is why, and what does that have to do with what they've done wrong, right? With any of these averus that they've done. And I think really what it all comes back to is, and I don't want to oversimplify it, because I think there's a lot of depth to it, and maybe we can all sort of spend time thinking about it. But put very, very simply, I think what these 7 things have in common is that they drive a really, really strong wedge. Again, some more obviously than others. A really, really strong wedge between us and other people. Right, between us and other people, this sort of extreme antisocial behavior, not to be confused with with antisocial behavior that we refer to now, but really sort of that sort of drives a strong wedge between our connection between us and other people, and in a sense, right, again, without wishing to be too callous about it, right, death is obviously the strongest way in which a person does that, right? We separate ourselves, not that we separate ourselves, but we are separated from everybody else. Death is, in a sense, that the biggest, particularly for, in our hashkafa, where we believe that a person goes on to somewhere else. It's not that they're ending, it's not that life has ended and everything is, gone to nothingness. We believe that a person has gone on to a better place. So what exactly are we mourning? We're mourning the loss of connection with that person. When a person is niftar, we're not saying they're gone forever. We're saying they are no longer connected to us. They have, in a sense, gone from this social forum, this social world that we live in, this ability to be able to connect to everybody together, and that is the strongest way in which they do that. And the Metzora has to do that. Why does the Metzora have to do that? Because all of these 7 things really do that very, very strongly. What they do is they drive such a strong wedge between us and other people. And as I said, some of them are more obvious than others. Obviously, murder is one of those. Okay, obviously, murder is one of those. Lashon hara, one might say that. There's always good justifications for Lashon hara, and that's why it's very, very common, because we always manage to find good justifications for it, and we always think, okay, they deserve it, and there's all good reason. But what the Gemara is telling us, that actually what it's doing is it's causing us to be removed from society as well. It's causing us to be removed from other people as well. Gasus ruach, arrogance, right? Arrogance, very, very difficult for us to appreciate this. When we're in that moment, but to appreciate that when we lord ourselves over others, when we look at ourselves and we bring ourselves up to that level, and we feel like we are better than other people around us, that in a sense removes us from other people. What we're doing is we're driving others away from us, and in a sense, I think that is really the very, very deep message of the Metzora. As I said, there's a lot to continue to sort of ponder over after this, But I think that's really at its core what the Metzora is teaching us, and what these various problematic behaviors that a person can go through do to us. And just to sort of round it off with a couple of final points, I think, well, let's look at it like this. If we're really right that death is the punishment over here, right? And the Metzora, in a sense, is almost as the Gemara actually says. Sorry, I never said this. The Gemara lists as one of the Gemara's. Well, Rabbi Sorotzkin pointed out the Gemara. The Gemara says that is a Metzora is choshev kameis. The Gemara actually says that very, very clearly. That the person who is a Metzora is considered to be as though they are dead. And actually, the halacha, again, not something we have nowadays, but just as someone who walks into a room with a mace, with a dead body, would become Tomei, that level of Tumah is transferred if someone walks into a room with a Metzora. Okay, so this is not just a sort of a nice line from the Gemara. It has halachic ramifications. So as I said, if we're talking about death being the punishment that the Metzora is getting, the Tumah is in a sense a Tumas mace, right? This impurity that is associated with death. Then what should be the Tahara that comes afterwards? The Tahara that comes afterwards should obviously be linked to life, right? Should obviously be linked to life. So now this is a little bit more maybe drush, but I think it's really powerful when you see it. So let's just look. Beginning of Perek Dalet. Now this is now in Parshas Metzora. Parshas Tazria talks about the Tzoras, talks about the punishment. Parshas Metzora begins to talk about the Biyom Tahorosot, right? The way they are able to become pure once again. This is now the beginning of Perek Dalet, if you have a Chumash. So now in Pasuk, so as I said, in Pasuk Beis says Biyom Tahorosot. Okay, Zos Tiyeh Toras HaMetzora Biyom Tahorosot. Pasuk Gimel. The Kohen, we haven't talked about why it's the Kohen who has to come out to actually see the person, right? Why do we send, if you have usually if you have someone with, the contagious disease, admittedly this is a spiritual disease, and there are a lot of proofs for that this is not a physical disease, obviously a spiritual disease. But even still, why do we send the Kohen out? The Kohen is going to become Tomei as a result of this. Why do we send people who are working in the Beis HaMikdash? They have better things to do. We should send someone else. Maybe we'll try and suggest an answer at the end. The sight has gone away, effectively. The blemish has gone away. What do you have to do? You take shtei tziporim. What type of tziporim? Any sort of birds? No, chayos. They have to be live birds, right? What would you have thought? That you'd just pick up a couple of dead pigeons that you found on the street? But the Torah emphasizes shtei tziporim chayos have to be live birds. What do you have to do with them? You kill one of them, you end up leaving one alive. What do you dip it into? El kli cheres al mayim chayim. Mayim chayim has to be living water, okay, spring water. But again, same thing. Esatzipor ha chayot, the living bird. What do? You kaf osov 8 eres ve'izov. Okay, you dip it in the blood with this 8 eres ve'izov. V'toval osom ve'esatzipor ha chayot. Again, once again. Ve'izor al mayim chayim. Again, same thing. Okay, living water, live birds, and comes back again. Shilach esatzipor ha chayot al panei hasadeh. So we have 6 times in just these 3 psukim the idea of life. Okay, so now within the Tahara process seems to center around life, seems to center around bringing the Metzora back to life, back into society, back amongst people now that they're ready. Why do they have to do that? Why are they ready to do that? So I'm not going to get into, okay, I won't do this in great detail, but just to point out that right in the middle, and I won't explain why it's in the middle, but it's literally, if you read the psukim carefully, these few words are literally in the very, very center of the Tahara process. The central pasuk is ve'es 8 eres ve'es sheni hatonas ve'es ha'izod. What do? You take this stick of cedar wood and this shni tolas, this string which is dyed from from a tolas, from a worm, from a very, very small animal. Ve'es ha'izov and a hyssop. Okay, hyssop. What type of branch is a hyssop? So look at Rashi, if you have it there. What does Rashi say? Here, so it's in the middle of this Esatzipor HaChayot. But if you look in the middle of that, he says, no, it's not in Rashi. I have it. I don't see it over here. So who do I have it from? Pretty sure it's Rashi. Okay, well, let's read it from here. Let me just double check. Oh, sorry, I've got it on the previous page for some reason. Okay, yes, it's on Pasuk. Because it's on the earlier mention of 8 Erez ve'ezov and Shnito Las ve'ezov. That's fine. Sorry. So 8 Erez. What is 8 Erez? This cedar branch. Lefisha hanegoim boim al gasus ruach, because they come for arrogance, and the cedar is a very, very strong tree, right? So that's why you take that, and what do? You dip that. You then have to put that down. You have to put it on you have to sort of lower it. What exactly does this person need to do in order to become pure, right? Or in order to become healed from their tzaras? Yashpil atmo, lower themselves, miga'avoso, kutolas, like a worm, like a nothingness, ucha and like a hyssop, which is a very, very low bush. So again, we see that at the central part of this Tahara process is the idea that the person has to lower themselves, has to bring themselves down. In the sense, they have built themselves up to be too haughty over other people, to be looking down on other people, and as a result, they are removed from everybody else. They, in a sense, sit shiva on themselves, right? For themselves, they're thinking about. And actually, we didn't talk about the fact that a Metzora has to take their clothes. Okay, as I said, there's loads and loads and loads of different proofs for all of this, but they're in a sense they're in avelos for themselves and recognizing, really thinking about how separated they are from everyone else as a result of what they have done, as a result of their actions of looking down on everybody else. Okay, any questions? Otherwise, we'll finish off with just one final perhaps sort of perspective on this Metzora, and then I'm looking for answers as to whether a Metzora would be allowed to use Zoom, which was the first question we asked, whether they would be allowed to use Zoom. Okay, any questions before we conclude? Okay, so just one final thing, which is that we've talked about the Metzora being, again, arrogance seems to be one of the core averos that a person has done wrong, right? And I think all of these are really, as we said, very, very social, or sort of the type of averos which really strongly drive a wedge between us and other people. Now, I'd like to ask you the following question: Lashon hara. Lashon hara is, of course, when we speak badly about others. Which part of the body would we associate, doing that sin with? So, simply speaking, you'd say the tongue, right? You'd say the tongue, you'd say the mouth, you'd say our speech, right? That is, in a sense, what we have done wrong. What we've done wrong is how we've spoken about other people. So I actually think that's not true. The problem with Lashon hara is not that we speak badly about other people. The problem with Shvichas Damim is not that we kill. Okay, it is obviously that we kill the other person. The problem that we steal is obviously to do with the money. But I think there's more. It's more than just the final action. What is it about? So let's look. What is the most common root? What is the most common root that comes up in Parshas Tazria over and over and over again? When we're talking about Tzoras, the Torah uses the same, comes back to the same root over and over again. Turning back to Perek Yud Gimel, beginning of Parshas Tazria, or towards the beginning of Parshas Tazria. What do we say? Adam ki yev over Tzoros eisos apachas. You have this, you find this Tzoras. What do you have to do next? Next Pasuk Gimel, Vira'ah HaKohen. The Kohen has to come and look at it. Okay, what does he look at? He looks at Mar'eh HaNega, Re'iyah. Again, same thing. Same pasuk, third time in the same pasuk. Vira'ahu HaKohen. The Kohen should look at it. Next pasuk, in Mar'eha Min Ha'or. Again, its appearance, the way it looks. Next pasuk, Vira'ahu HaKohen. Next pasuk, Vira'ah HaKohen. Okay, again, it's just over and over again. Next pasuk, Hey Ra'oso Ha'el HaKohen. You have to show it to the Kohen. Next pasuk, Vira'ah HaKohen. If you don't believe me, it just keeps going and going and going. The idea of Re'iyah, of seeing, is the most repeated idea within Parshas Tazria, and I think all of this comes back to not the way we speak about other people, not what we actually do to other people, but the way we look at other people, the way we perceive other people, our perspective when we look around at other people. How is it that we look at other people? Do we look down on them? Do we look at them and say, and sort of, again, even whether we say it to somebody else or we don't, do we think in our minds, look at what they're doing, look at what that person maybe doing, look what they have, and I want that. Okay, Toras Chaim, stinginess again was one of the averos that the Gemara listed that links to tzaras. So all of these things I think are not just about the action that is done, but at its root, at its core, what the Torah is teaching us is that it's about the way we perceive other people, the way that we look at other people, and I think really that's a very, 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 very powerful lesson. And so my suggestion, my personal, again, if anyone wants to. What do we think about Zoom for Metzora? Yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down. I think it's different. So there is again, obviously no post can discuss this. The Rishonim do actually discuss whether you can create camps of a Metzora, right? Whether you can have many Metzorim outside of the Machane together. Whether they can live out together, and the I think the consensus seems to be not. Right, that they can't live together. The point is that they have to be separate, and so I think it would be a problem. Okay, I think that this, in a sense, has been a lifeline for many people during the times when we've been separated from each other. This has been a way to be able to connect when we've been unable to in other ways. And the point of Tzaras is to keep the Metzora thinking about why they have been separated from everybody else, to keep them thinking about how separate they are from everybody else. And it's a very, very, very powerful punishment. And maybe that's why it's only, as I said, for very, very special people. It does seem to be in Tanakh that it's only great people who seem to get Tzaras, as you said, Miriam, Uzziah, Naaman, not so much so actually. So maybe that's not such a good example, but certainly many, many times we see great tzaddikim who got tzaras for seemingly small things that they did wrong. And but I think as it's root, as we said, the goal is to try and remind us that the way that we look at other people is critical, and sometimes we do just need to take a step back, think whether we can view people in a better light, and recognize that we obviously have our own challenges ourselves, and those are the things that we need to work on. Okay, I hope that was a helpful insights into some Tazria Metzora.
Shkoya, thank you so much.
Not at all. If anyone has any questions?
Shkoya, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you. Thank you. If the Rav goes away again, we know we have a ready-made replacement to step in. Hopefully we won't leave it as long as inviting you again.
Hopefully it won't be on Zoom as well.
Hopefully see you sooner than that. And thank you for giving of your time. It's very much appreciated, and thank you very much, and have a good
Great
Shabbat.
pleasure.
Thank
Great
you.
pleasure.
Beautiful Divrei Torah. Thank you. Shkoya.
Lovely to see everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.